Good morning. Today we're going to be going over what to look for rust-wise when buying a 70 Ford truck. As you'll see in the title, it is covered, what to look for in buying a 70s Ford truck. This is 1979, it has a lot of rust issues, and today we're just going to cover the cab only. We're going to break this up into probably a 4 or 5 part video covering the cab, the front clip, the frame, the rear body, and the engine and powertrains. We're going to move to the back of the truck. We're going to start at the back of the truck, kind of go forwards. We're going to show some of the tools and some of the things to have when looking at a $500 truck like this. And I'm going to range the difficulty in repairing the rust from a 1 being fairly easy, anyone can do at home, to a 10, something that you've got to pull the cab off of, and it is a very difficult repair to do. So let's get started. I waited to do this video until I had the glass out of the truck to highlight some of the problems that you're going to see that you may not be able to see when you go to look at a vehicle when it's sitting alongside the road, but some of the telltale signs to know that there is in fact a problem hidden there. So one of the telltale signs is this rust right in here that you can see. The gasket would cover this up, and the window of course would cover it up, but there is rust right in here, and this is a very common problem. It has a little bit over on the other side, passenger side, and this truck's much worse. The other area is up in here around this edge. This one's not actually that bad. There is some rust starting here, but this is pretty easy to grind this down, clean this up, and really not have to do any repairs to this. This repair, because you actually have 3 seams kind of going all into one together right here, is fairly difficult of a repair. I would probably put this at a 2 or a 3 on the repairs range as far as fixing the repairs. Up here it's a little bit more difficult, probably about a 5 up in here, because you do get some warpage in here, and this is concaved, and it's kind of difficult to make a patch panel for this, and there's nobody that really sells patch panels for the roofs of these trucks. Now as we go down, you can see this bottom edge here is completely shot all the way across this edge. This isn't a terrible repair if you have a bead roller. I'm going to do a little bit different repair on this because this is a low budget project. I'm going to do a little bit different repair on this to show different ways you can repair, rust issues like this. But you can see this truck has got some problems down here. Now you come down the cab corner. The cab corner is really not that bad on this truck, but I'm going to replace this cab corner. Normally, a lot of people would say just patch this panel here and just patch this here. I'm going to replace this because I've had a bunch of cab corners that I've patched, and then later on, the paint started bubbling and they needed to be repaired after 5 or 6 years. So I'm just going to cut this down here and just replace from this level down, just so I can get in there, clean out the rust, and get everything situated. Now as we move forward into the truck, as you can see down here, there is some rust holes down in here. The floorboards actually on this truck are not in terribly bad shape. One main area is right down in there. That is one of the most difficult areas to fix because there's actually 3 layers of metal there. There's this cross member, there's a bracket that you can see right here that holds the seat belts in place, and then there's this outer skin. In order to fix that properly, you've got to take all 3 of those out and rebuild them. So what that means is you'll have a big hole here, then a smaller hole, and then a little bit smaller hole to get to all 3 levels. Another area that's constantly an issue is in here, this bottom edge of this. Moisture will get down in here and rot this out. You can see moisture's gotten in there. Hasn't rotted through yet, but it is starting to rust. Another area of concern is down here in the corner. Mice, moisture, a plethora of different things happens that causes that to rust out. That is a pretty difficult area to fix. That right there is probably about a 6 or 7 to fix, only because you're working inside the cab. There's not a lot of room. The parts, there's a lot of different angles. Trying to make a part, your best bet is to find a junk truck and cut one out. This is probably about an 8 or a 9 to fix, because there's so many different levels of metal that you have to go through in order to fix that. It is just extremely difficult to fix that one. Moving up through here, an area you want to look at, which this truck isn't too bad, but up and around here, you can start to see that this is starting to bubble a little bit up in here. Not terrible, but a lot of times these drip edge will rot out. And when they do, trying to find another one, you either have to cut one out of a good cab, or you've got to find a 70s van and use, cut one out of a 70s van and use that. LTD wagons, there's a couple other vehicles you can utilize this drip edge from. But, like I said, that is something you definitely want to look at. This is very difficult. This is probably, there again, an 8 or a 9 to repair this, because you've got to take all this apart, rebuild it. There's 3 layers of metal in here. And once you take this apart, you really open up a basket of worms. Now, one of the most common problems is right up in here, this rust right in here. This is something I'm going to, focus on this channel, repairing this rust, and how to do it easily and in a very simple manner. This is something that when I bought this truck about 2 years ago, this was not rusted out. This has all happened in the past 2 years. This truck sat in a chicken barn for a long time. There was a lot of dirt and debris that sat up in here, but this rusted from the inside outwards. But when I first looked at this truck, you never would have known that that was rusted. If you have a truck that you're looking at, one thing I highly recommend is pick up a cheap scope like this, bore scope, camera. You can take the visor down, the sun visor, you can run this down through and see how badly rotted this is. Doesn't matter if it's a $500 truck like this, or if it's a $15,000 truck. If the owner of the truck will allow you to take that visor down and run a camera through, I recommend doing that every single time, because it's going to tell you the condition of this roof. The truck could look perfectly fine. 2 years later, the roof could be rotted out like this, and now you have a major repair. This repair is definitely about a 9 on the scale to get in here, especially if it's gone through all 3 layers of metal that are in here. You could be weeks working on this to get this to look right. Now, another area of concern to look at is right down in here. I don't know how well the camera is going to show it, but right down in there, debris traps down in there, and there's a little gusset. There's a piece of metal in there that holds dirt and debris that come down in from the where the windshield wiper gutter assembly is. That is perhaps one of the worst. That is perhaps a 10, because you have multiple layers of metal you've got to go through in order to get to that. Now, another predominant area that these trucks rot out in is down in here, in this B-pillar, this lower B-pillar. You can see up here, it started to rust through because there's 2 layers of metal. Moisture comes down and gets trapped right in here and will rot out. This one's not terribly bad. That's a pretty easy fix. This lower B-pillar, you can buy these replacement panels. It's not terribly bad. It's probably about a 5, 4 or 5 to fix that. The other area is up front here, the lower A-pillar. This also, dirt and stuff traps down in here, gets caught up in there, and that will rot out. There again, it's about a 4 or 5. You got to take the door off really to fix that right, but it's probably about a 4 or 5 to repair it. Another area to look at is right in here, this lower door, down in here. This will trap, stuff will get trapped from that rain gutter down in here and will rot this out. It's not a terrible repair to do, but that means you've got a problem in here. And a lot of times when you open this up, you'll find there's bigger problems than just a rust hole right in there. Now we're going to move around to the, well, actually, let's hit the bottom of the door. If you look at the bottom of the door, right in here, you can see that this has, some pretty good rust. They do manufacture an inner door bottom as well as the outer door bottom. to line everything up, they don't, the replacement ones are pretty decent if you get them through LMC or Autometal Direct. They're pretty decent, but they don't always line up good here. So if you can keep the repair down here, down below this point, and just replace from this point down, you can generally do a pretty good job that no one will ever even know that you've done. But if you've got to get up into here, they make them so that they come up to about here. These lines a lot of times won't be perfect, and it really takes a lot of, you know, hammer and dolly work to get this to all match up. This is probably more difficult than the outer. This is probably, you know, a 6 or a 7 to get this, only because, you know, not only do you have to get the curve of this right, you've also got to get all this lined up right. So you know, it takes a little bit, because I've had these where I've replaced it, it's looked good, I put it all together, I go to close the door, and there's a 1/4 inch gap there's a 1/4 inch gap down in here where it's either in too far or it's out too far, because I didn't have this lined up perfectly when I put it together. You know, I like to do it, put it on and off the vehicle a bunch of times, you know, get it tacked up, take it on and off the vehicle a bunch of times before we finally weld everything up and finish it, just to make sure that that's not an issue. Now moving up to up here, right in here is that gusset that we tried to show. I don't know how well it came out on the camera, but there is a gusset right in here. If you start seeing bubbling in here, that means that this rain gutter up here has gotten plugged up with pine needles, sand, dust, debris, etc. And it's gotten trapped right in here and is rotted through. Now also, it's difficult to see with the fender on, but down in here, there's a little drain, a little flapper with a drain down in here. That can also get plugged up and get rotted out. Like I said, it's hard to see because it's behind the fender, but this is another area that you really want to take a look out for. You know, if you've got one of those little cameras, take your inner plastic fender here, put the camera in there and take a look at that. Now up here, as you can see, there would have been the rubber gasket for the windshield that went around here. Now this is a telltale sign. I knew there was going to be a problem here. It's actually not as bad as what I thought it was going to be, but you can see where the rust has started to penetrate through right into here. But like I said, being that this rust was creeping up right here from the gasket, I knew that there was going to be a problem in here. This is probably there again, about a 5 or 6 to patch. This one's not too bad. I've got one spot here, one spot there, and a spot over on the other side. So I'm just going to put little patch panels in to do that. When you have to do the whole thing, when this whole edge is rotted out, that is a problem, because the roof, as soon as you cut this, you've gotten rid of the retention of this, and this roof will want to come down, it'll want to go up, the metal will want to go in all different directions depending upon, you know, dents in the roof and what's been done to the roof over the years. So by doing little patches, you know, you can keep this fairly straight. When you've got to do the whole thing, you really have to be mindful of, has that roof moved up and down at all? And if it has, you know, correct it before you weld it in there. Another area, and this one's actually in really good shape, I was surprised because I could start seeing a little bit of bubbling down here, is in through here. This is a real common area that rots out on these cabs, but this one, amazingly, is in good shape on both sides. So, you know, I got lucky there. But really kind of keep an eye out. You'll see that the telltale signs of the rust streaks coming down through here. If you see that, you know that there's going to be a problem, just like up here, down there. So, you know, being mindful for that. Now, the other thing is down in here in this gutter, on the 77 in Newers, this was all galvanized. On some of the older ones, they actually, I've seen a few of these that are not galvanized in here. And this trough that's down underneath here will rust out. And you'll notice that if you open up the hood, you'll see bubbles and stuff, you know, on the firewall. Or you may see rust streaks inside the cab running down behind the heater box. You know, that's a sign that either you've got a bad heater core, at some point it had a bad heater core that leaked for a long time, or that this is starting to go bad, and moisture and rust and stuff starting to go down in there. The downside to this is you go through and restore the truck, and then it's raining out, you're driving down the road, and you got moisture and water coming in all over your nice, clean, new carpet or new floor. That's just gonna rust it out again and cause problems. So something you really want to address, you know, but in order to fix that, you got to take the whole dash, you got to take everything out to get in there. To correct that. And it's really, you know, that's definitely a 10, because you not only have to repair the rust, you've got a lot to disassemble just to get to the rust. Next, we're going to take and put the truck up on the lift. We're going to go underneath of the truck, and we're going to look at all the problems underneath the truck and discuss those. Okay, one area I didn't cover before I picked the truck up, and I want to cover it real quick, is this edge all the way around here, the front and the back. This, if moisture can get in here, will get trapped up in here and rot this out. This is very difficult to fix. This is definitely a 7. One, because you're inside the cab here working, and it's just not a lot of working room in there. And 2, to try to make a piece of metal that matches this arch. It's got a flange here. It is just not easy. The other thing I wanted to show is down here on the floorboards. As you can see, the floorboards are starting to go on the driver's side. This one's pretty bad, and I want to, you know, show it in more detail once we get the truck up in the air. So we'll be right back in a minute once I get the truck up. Okay, we're back again, got the truck up in the air. One thing I want to show everybody is these cab supports here. This is a very important thing to look at as far as rust wise. In order to replace this, you got to pick the body up off the truck at least an inch or 2 in order to get this out of here. This one actually is not in terribly bad shape other than this bottom edge here. I've got to replace this floor pan anyway, and when you look at in through here, you can see that this is all bubbling and kind of nasty. I'm going to replace all of this just to get that rust out of there. I'll grind this back, probably take about an 1/8 or 1/4 of an inch off that to clean that all up, so that looks good. Up in here, this is another trouble spot where they rust out. You know, I'm going to really take a close look at that. Back in here, this is another area. As you can see, this is galvanized metal. So this typically doesn't rust out too often, but these inner rockers will rust out. But up in here, especially if mice or something get in there, they rot out. Back in here, this will rot out as well. This truck's actually in pretty decent shape, but that's something that when you're looking at one of these, you want to crawl underneath here and take a look at. Now, another important thing to look at is this is a cab support out of my Bicentennial Edition. When I bought this truck, the only thing I really saw, and even someone like me that buys, you know, dozens of these things a year, I just saw this, so I was just going to replace this. It wasn't until I took the floorboard out and started chipping away at the inside here, I realized how bad this was. And when I really started beating this, all of this fell out, and then I realized I had to change the entire thing. Like I said, I ended up pulling the entire cab off because this was bad, and the cross member up in here was also bad that I didn't realize was as in bad a shape as what it was until I pulled the cab off to replace this. So, you know, you can get yourself into a real mess that you think that you're just fixing one thing, and once you start taking stuff apart, you find out there's 10 other things. Now from down here, you can see right here, this rust. You can see what I'm talking about, the 3 layers. You've got this cross member here, then you have this layer of metal here, which supports the seat belts, and then you have the actual floor here. You've got to get into all 3 of these. You got to clean the rust out between here and here in order to prevent this from happening again. If you don't, you know, what will happen is it'll come back, and, you know, it'll be much more difficult to fix the second time around than what it was the first time. Another area to look at is in here. Make sure that these rubber mounts are not either rotted through the frame in here or around up in there. You know, that can rot out. Another area is this cross member right in here. This also can rust out and create problems. And like I said, a lot of these fixes, if you find that this cross member is rotted out, you've got to take the entire cab off in order to fix it. With the frame and everything down here, there's just too much stuff in the way in order to repair that. So let's take a look up in here. You know, you can't really see, but there is a seam up in here along where my finger is. That will, you know, trap some dirt and stuff and rot out as well. It's something to take a look at. You know, it's not a bad repair if the motor's out, but with a motor in it, then, you know, it's kind of difficult. Other than that, that's pretty much it for this video for today. Stay tuned for more videos. We're going to be covering the front clip as well as the rear body, the frame, and then eventually the powertrain. So stay tuned.